Welcome everyone to Art Lounge Alley. This is the Drawing Comics Part 28 stream. I'm your host, and I will be jumping into drawing comics. Or rather, coloring comics. I would like to first start by inking. And I'm going to continue inking this panel right here. Where I left off. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, this is work done from Conan the Barbarian. This is John Buscema's work. You guys could see he has amazing understanding of the human figure, but he also maintains a comic book vibe, which I really enjoy. So I'm a huge fan of his work. And if you guys missed the first one, hey Bex, welcome. Yeah, so I was actually just about to jump in. Bex is asking, what's the inspiration here? So for me, I really like copying comics as a way of reading, really. So, you know, for example, when you read a book, you are reading through the mind of the artist, right? The writer. He's telling the story, he's creating the characters, and you're just kind of going with it. You know, you're getting into it, you're creating the characters that he's describing, you're creating the scenes that he's describing and the story. So drawing the comics, drawing out all these panels, it's the same experience. I'm drawing out the characters that the artist created. I'm drawing out the scenes that the artist created as well, and telling the story through his work, you know. So you're just kind of in the mind of the artist visually as well. So I just like to enjoy that. I like recreating the characters and you know, seeing them kind of manifest on the paper and manifest the scenes on the paper, the same way as your imagination manifests the literary work of a writer. So that's one inspiration, and I like doing that not just with John Buscema's work, but there are other artists as well, where I just like to just jump into their world, jump into that reality for some time. But the other very big inspiration is learning from these comics, you know, learning the process, whether it is inking, whether it's coloring, you know, really understanding all these different, I guess, subjects, techniques, mediums, you know, whether it's using the brush pen, like from videos that I've seen of John Buscema inking his work, he would just use like a regular brush that you would see like painters paint with. And he was able to ink and create, as you could see even on the comic panels, like the thinnest lines using just this brush. So this gives me an opportunity to really practice that, you know, without having to come up with the characters each and every time, without having to come up with the scenes and angles, perspectives, to focus on the technique, to focus on understanding the anatomy better, to focus on understanding figure poses and lines. You know, all that stuff is pretty much there, and I just technically have to grasp it and train over and over, you know, just the same way as you improve on pretty much anything else. You draw it, or you read over and over and you get better at it, or you play music over and over again, you get better at it. Same ideas here. So this just kind of takes away the very laborious task of having to create the story, the characters, the angles, as I was going through the list of all those things. So it's a great tool to learn these techniques, to learn perspective, to learn anatomy, to learn how to tell the story, to learn the camera angles, times that you want to pan out, how to draw that, times you zoom in, times you have a bird's eye view, times you have certain face expressions that you want to portray. Like, all of that is pretty much present. And and what I really enjoy about his work, and I've mentioned this several times, is his ability to still maintain like a mature vibe about his work. There's this like realness to it. Like, even if you look at this panel and how he's sitting and he's just kind of leaning in, talking to this wizard over fire, just in his body, and it's the body language, really, it still portrays this like kind of mature vibe about it. It's not extremely stylized, it's not extremely exaggerated, yet it's still very much a comic book feel. So I kind of like that he was able to balance those things. And as you go through the panels, like even in this shot right here, not crazy amount of detail, right? But the way he draws hands and his understanding of proportion here, despite it being kind of like a distant shot of Conan, it still maintains like a real vibe, more close to reality rather. And he just is so great and so skillful at using the right lines to create that. Like, just adding these lines right here adds more character, as opposed to if you were to take them away, and it would be just like this solid kind of clothing. So he understands all those things, and even in the folds of the sleeve, you could tell that it's not a lot of detail, but he uses the right brush strokes to demonstrate that. He makes the right ones according to the motion as well of like the cloth. So just looking at his work, you just understand, like, him drawing horses, like, he has such a great overall understanding of comics, of panel work, that I think it's very useful for drawing. And this is just another way of like admiring that work as well. But with that said, I'm going to quickly wash the brush, because as you guys can tell, it's kind of stiff, it's a little bit gunky. I'll be right back. The great benefit of this brush pen is that it's nylon brush tips. So you could wash it, you could reuse this. All you have to do is unscrew it, fill it up with ink, and you're back in business. I have this little rag here after I wash it, and make sure to dry out the brush, because then it tends to like bleed a lot more. And that's a no-go for really fine detail. I have this page here where just kind of make sure that it's not bleeding too much. It's mixed in with water, so the lines are going to be thicker for some time than I'd like them to be. It's just a way to like air this out. Test out various lines. And surprisingly, for such a thick brush, you could really achieve extremely thin lines with it. It really comes down to hand sensitivity rather than the brush, which I think is another great reason for using it, because it really makes you very sensitive to the lines, to how you hold the pencil. So I'm going to switch back to the scene for accuracy. This is the scene right here. And I think the other inspiration I have for this is there isn't really enough about John Buscema. You know, he's a huge contributor to Marvel and all the characters, especially in the beginning. And he created so many different comic books. Yet when it comes to like, you know, finding more information about him, finding photos of him, which is really difficult. I made a 5-minute intro for the first Art Lounge Alley of drawing comics. So if you ever want to check that out, it's actually in the videos folder on Twitch in the collection section. And it's labeled Short Flick about John Buscema, where I talk about his work. I talk about his journey to becoming an artist at Marvel, and also show some amazing work of his that isn't very common when it comes to what's really out there. They're just like sketchbook drawings that have been released, I believe, in a book now, but for the most part, when you search his name or you look for his work, it's usually just Marvel characters and covers that he's done, rather than these like sketchbook drawings. So yeah, I just wanted to keep his work alive, keep people more familiar with John Buscema, and hopefully inspire people to check out more of his work. So Bex asks, what is the story about? So this is based on a movie, actually. Conan the Barbarian. It's a movie in the 80s with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. And to be honest, it's been some time where I read this entire comic book or watched the movie. The movie I must have seen at least, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I haven't really revisited it, but the thing about Conan the Barbarian in general is that, or the comics rather, is that the story isn't as like a general story from start to finish. Like each issue has its own sort of direction in a way, and it connects as you go through it. But in this specific issue, he is going on a journey to confront somebody that he once knew. And along the way, he meets some friends who end up guiding him and helping him in that endeavor. And you could see here in this panel right here, he figured out where the cult leader is, and he's trying to infiltrate it, so he disguises himself. He knocks out one of the cult members, and in this panel he disguises himself as one of them to get closer and to get to a point of confrontation. But the general story about Conan is about, a person with the right values, basically, going through life and facing all sorts of adversity and challenges, not just physically, but mentally as well. And shows great resistance and resilience and strength, not just physically, but mentally as well. It's like an adventure comic book, really. And you get to see him go through all sorts of adventures. And it's cool to see how they come up with different scenarios for him to be challenged by. Like this time it's a cult leader, another one it's like a giant spider out in the jungle that he comes across, and faces that, and pirates at some point. So it's just like all sorts of stuff. And just like any other comic book, like as I was mentioning before, like there are certain comic books that people kind of read at face value, but really they're metaphorical for the human experience. And just reading through these comics, you can kind of draw a parallel between things that we face as people, some repeating themes, and how each character kind of navigates through it. Bex, do you read any comic books? Do you have a comic book that you're currently reading, or you have just finished reading? Let the stream know. Let them check out something that you are currently reading. This is such a fine area. I really want to focus as much as possible. Make sure the lines are thin. Also considering that I just washed this brush pen. Beck says he read Watchmen, Walking Dead, Invisible, and a lot of Marvel. Yeah, Watchmen was great. The movie was great. And I really didn't think that I was gonna like it, actually, like, based on, like, the costumes and just looking at it from that perspective, I thought that it might have been a little bit on the cheesy side, or just like an outdated sort of comic. But the story is really deep. Like, the movies were great. The movie was really good. The series was excellent. And the characters were actually very much were very timeless, in a sense. Like, each of the characters really represented, I think, certain ideas or certain emotions that people feel, or certain feelings that they feel, or different types of personalities that are out there. And I really like that. The TV show was, Bex asks, what did you think of the TV show? The TV show, the Watchmen TV show, was excellent. I thought it really, I think it played on a lot of historical events as well. Like, it had to do with an event that dealt with Black history, you know, something that isn't really talked about much, and how a certain town in, like, I believe it was like 1920s, was demolished. It was demolished at the time. I think that Black neighborhood was developing its own Wall Street, in a sense, and people were prospering and doing well, and then just through, like, you know, political events of the time, they ended up bombing the place, and a lot of the people there just suffered from it, and it was just an incredibly horrific, awful part of history that isn't really talked about. So I like that they brought that into light, in a sense, and it really talked about all those things, and made people more familiar with that sort of history, and give people a better understanding of how things progressed from that, you know, kind of message. Yeah, that's what it was. It was the 1921 Tulsa Massacre. That's what Bex wrote on there. Bex says, to think the KKK was so powerful, they had an air fleet to attack this town with. Yeah, you know, that's really, it was a huge part of it. I mean, really, that whole era was just such a disaster, in a sense, because you also have to remember, and this is something that I was talking about before, there's a thing that happened in history. It's called Operation Paperclip, where basically the U.S. saved a lot of Nazis from Germany, and they told them basically, come here, like scientists and, you know, people who obviously were very powerful financially, very powerful influentially. They got them to come here and basically continue to work here. So I don't know what they were thinking there. Obviously, they were sharing values, And this is even, well, I think that Operation Paperclip was a little bit after 1921, but it's just to say that same value, those same ideas really were present here as well. And it's no surprise, if you really think about history and how things unfolded here in the States, it really is no surprise that things turned out that way. I mean, even if you think about from the time of let me just find a different page to ink as I'm talking about this, because that's really what I was trying to do. Let's go with this one here. If you think about just like American history and the point where America was colonized, in a sense, like the whole idea of colonization is pretty much based on, the same values as the Nazis, the same value as KKK or whatever. Like they all have that same idea of like superior, inferior, a person is allowed to be treated a certain way because of this like concept of what they seem as superior or what they seem inferior. So when they came in, they were colonizing these areas. The way that they were treating people, natives, was very much similar. So some people are thinking about, oh, like KKK are so awful or whatever, but really it stemmed from Europe. All that came from Europe as well, and like how people were being treated there. Like that stuff isn't just from World War I and II, and all that stuff that happened during that time. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen just in those span of 10 years. It took time. It was people of older generation who were brainwashing the younger generation to believe. I mean, it's similar to what is going on now, in a sense. It's not like teenagers came up with these concepts. It was old people, old values, people who wanted to maintain slavery because that brought them profits, because that brought them money and fame and recognition and all that other stuff. So of course they're gonna fight against that being abolished. They're gonna fight against all the privilege that they've gone from, basically abusing and using people and just doing horrific, disgusting things. They brainwashed a lot of these kids, a lot of these young people, conditioned them to believe that this is the right way to go about things, and it kept on going. It wasn't built over time. It wasn't just Germany or whatever. It was a lot of people who had these values, and they just kept pushing them on to the new generation. Nobody's born with any of these concepts. It's all a form of education that perpetuates it. So that was just the result of that. Many years of terrible forms of education, having the wrong people be politically involved and influence others. I mean, there's like so much that goes into that. Bex wrote, "Arms race of the knowledge. No matter how it was found, the knowledge was too valuable to be given to anyone else. Many countries had a version of paperclip." Yep. Yeah, it's exactly that. Arms race knowledge, that's a huge thing as well. People who are incredibly nationalistic as well, or racist, where they're just like, oh, we are the better ones, or we're the ones who should get more privilege to X, Y, and Z, whether it's resources, whether it's fame, whether it's influence, and somebody else who doesn't want to is gonna try to basically thwart that, right? Like prevent it from happening. So what they do is the same thing. They try to like increase as much money as possible, so that they can have the weaponry. They can have like the army in case the other opposing view becomes a problem or whatever else, and that becomes incredibly toxic, right? I mean, that so many people could play on that, and so many people could play into that while having totally different motivations. And manipulate that concept in order to achieve whatever it is. All they have to do is just whisper this idea to somebody who has a lot of money and a lot of influence and try to get them to go along with it, when really their only endeavor is to be incredibly powerful or rich, or to see how many people they can manipulate, and barely has anything to do with these other concepts. You're asking some excellent questions, man. Or woman, I'm not sure. But Bex asks, what did you think of how history was taught to you at schools where you were from? Well, I did a lot of studying myself. Like, I kind of read on my own. I didn't really, I guess, pay attention to it. I kind of knew that things are going to be fabricated and things are going to be hidden. Things aren't. No one really in that field, when it comes to politics, wants the truth to come out, because that's going to compromise them, and it's going to compromise their endeavors or whatever else. So when people are quoting these like billionaires and millionaires, and they're saying, well, this person thought this is going to happen in the future, or this is what's going to happen, and I'm like, none of those things are honestly what they think. They're not going to release to the general public things that is going to compromise their position, that's going to compromise their power, that's going to compromise their influence. A lot of these politicians, they want you depending on them, because if you depend on them, the more that the more power they have to make decisions, to influence people, that sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time just doing my own research and like reading up on material that I was interested in, and digging through things. But I think another really important role when it comes to that, when you're asking like, what did you think of how history was taught? Really, it depends on the teacher, because sometimes you have these teachers who are there because it's their title. They're teachers, it's their job. They're there to just do their job. And you'll get some teachers who are just so disinterested in actually teaching the subject, or they're just so fed up with whatever it is. And sometimes it's valid, if they're not getting paid well, and then they're in like teaching in rough areas and stuff, and it becomes this like question of like, is it worth all this? Especially if I can't pay my bills, or especially if I'm not thriving, and the administration is toxic or whatever else. Like, it really reflects in their work as well. They come in, they're just like, all right, let's just get it over with, and they teach the subject in this very like resentful kind of way. And I think that happens way too frequently. Like, I think a lot of teachers are in that position because they're not getting paid much. They come in, they have like debt from college, and they want to pay that off. They also want to be able to pay the bills and possibly take vacations or whatever it is. I don't think that they're compensated well. And also because I think some teachers end up being teachers for the title, like, I'm a teacher, and that's what they're there for. they end up not really putting in enough work as becoming teachers, like understanding social interaction, understanding different forms of psychology, different forms of learning. And they'll see a student and they're like, oh, this person has ADD, rather than really understanding how each person can learn the same material if it's taught, or if that person is understood more. You could understand in a sense, like, oh, this person is more of a visual learner, as opposed to an auditory. This person understands better through reports, so they'll flunk somebody, and that kind of disheartens the students, or the students start to think that they have like learning problems or some sort of disabilities or whatever, when really it has to do with that. The teacher just doesn't recognize that there are different types of learning abilities, and that the material really could be grasped just as well as somebody else if it's taught the right way. And I think that also has to do with like the type of education that they're getting when they're trying to work towards like a college degree in teaching or whatever else. Like, is it a requirement to have a psychology degree? I don't think so. But it's such an essential part of teaching. You really do have to understand psychology. You have to understand how people work so that you can navigate through the class in an effective way and really up your game as far as like how many students pass your class, or how you're teaching the subjects in a sense. So Beck says, teaching is the biggest privilege of my life. The fact that I get to design my own primary and secondary history curriculum means I get to do it better. Yeah, it's excellent, man. Yeah, that's the way to see it. And you sound like you're really into it. You're into what you're doing, and you're into teaching the class and stuff. And I think that's like one of the biggest, most important things about teaching. So what's your opinion about it? I mean, from what you remember of how history was taught to you, and how it left you in a sense, whether it's in high school or in college even, like what was your experience like? Share with us so we can get a better collective understanding. Like me personally, I still remember a teacher that I had in high school that really influenced me. Like, I remember him very vividly, distinctly, and I think of him very often because he was a very passionate teacher. Like, when it was a AP English class, it wasn't history, but he did touch up on history, and we talked about a lot of the books. Like, he would assign us books to read, and then we would come and sit in his class, and he was so into the books that he was reading. Like, you could tell he loved the stories. He understood the stories very well. He had a very like poetic way of talking about them that was also very engaging and inspiring. So, and I noticed it wasn't just me. Like, everybody who was in that class that took his class was also very much engaged. Like, some people that I saw in other classes who were not as engaged in those classes were very much animated in his class and were very much into what he was talking about. And I really liked that about him. And I thought that he was such a great teacher because of that. He was able to really change how students perceived learning and how they saw, like, reading especially. You would talk to some people, they're not really avid readers, but if you could inspire people to do that, that's you're doing an amazing and fantastic job as a teacher. So Bex wrote, I really disliked most of how it was taught us at schools. It was very simplistic, but also hid the ugly reality behind a lot of history. Simply put, we need to show more sides of history. Yep, absolutely. For example, Black history. Yes, without a doubt. It is important to teach about the bad stuff that has been done, and we sort of do that, but we also need to teach the amazing part of Black history. The fact that most people don't know that the richest man who ever lived was Black is a joke. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very stupid. It's cowardly. Number one, it's extremely cowardly that they're just like, oh, well, it's not teacher because it's gonna make people like really resent, and it's like, well, there's a lot of things that we do in history that is resentful. Are we just not gonna teach anything? Like, that's such a stupid way of trying to solve a problem. The way you solve a problem is that you confront it, you study it, you see like, okay, well, this is where things went wrong, this is what you shouldn't be doing. These things ended up being a complete disaster, so let's not repeat that. You don't sweep it under the rug and say like, oh, it never happened. Oh, let's not talk about that. That's just gonna make things problematic. But there's like so many different avenues to that. There's definitely people who are afraid of it because they're just like, oh, that's gonna cause resentment, that's gonna cause retaliation. That's something that they've been talking about all the time, which is stupid. And then there's also people who don't want that because, again, they don't want to empower Black people in ways like they don't want them to be successful or whatever else because they're racist and they're stupid. So there's like, when people think about or talk about topics, whether, it's I think they tend to generalize things into like one category or one avenue, but really there's like multiple avenues that play into the same problem. So like for instance, like in that there are people who are afraid of it, and then there are people who just don't want any of that progress because it's going to compromise their power, it's going to compromise their profit, it's going to compromise like, so it's like really for very narcissistic, selfish reasons that they just want to prevent things. So like regress isn't just coming from one avenue. There's like multiple avenues from that perspective. The same idea of like, I think when it comes to people who talk about religious people, they're like, oh, it's the religious people who are stopping it. But really, there are a lot of avenues in that as well. There are people who lie about being religious. So, for instance, like when it comes to politics, they lie because the more religious people believe them, the more votes they're going to get, right? The more money and contribution they're going to get. And what do? They just continue to pretend to be religious. So, and then people make the false association where they're like, oh, it's religious people who are the issue. It's like, well, no, it's really people who are incredibly corrupt and they don't actually follow any of the things that they talk about that is in religion or whatever else. So there's that. There are people who are like, oh, capitalism is great because it provides this incentive and that, so on and so forth. And then there are people who think capitalism is great because it allows them to continue their racist endeavors, so there's just like, I'm just saying there's like so many different avenues to something that is claimed under the same umbrella. So really it's really important to examine all those things thoroughly. Beck says, when I got to the school, we were still teaching Columbus as a hero. Fuck no. Put my foot down on that day one. Rule one of politics, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Right, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like they're not focusing on progress. They're not focusing on what politics is really for, to provide progress, to assign the right people responsibilities that everybody can't take on, we don't have that time of day, so we need specialists to kind of look out for those things. But none of these people actually really want to do that. They become so wrapped up in popularity and fame and just being completely enamored by the attention that they're getting, that they actually stop doing their job and they start just trying to become like celebrities, or like you're saying, like storytellers. Like they just talk a bunch of bullshit so that they could get more claps and they could get more likes and they could get more, just very self-centered endeavors, when the job is really about the people. That's really, like, if we're talking about the Constitution, it's about maintaining a civilized society for the people, and them being the people as well, part of the people. But the job responsibility is not to look out for yourself. It's to make sure that all these things are right, and people have their freedom, people have their dignity, and they have the opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? So, but none of these idiots really want to do that. And there's a very select few of them, and a lot more of them are just focused on like all those things: money, power, influence, playing these superiority games with each other. You have these like big figures traveling around the world talking to each other, and just basically ego stroking themselves about their accomplishments and how influential they are. I mean, if you even think about it on a small scale in schools, where you have groups of people, right? Or you have certain individuals who are very much like that, and their only concern is that, like, popularity, or what people think of them and how they could influence others and so on and so forth. Now just blow that up on a bigger scale, blow that up as far as like national leaders go, absolutely the same kind of personalities, and in a lot of ways they don't really care about others, and they just end up focusing more on themselves and how to manipulate other people to think of them even more highly than they already do. And that just that's what really ruins a lot of the things, is then who is actually working to improve things? Who is actually looking out for the interest of let's say, a neighborhood? If all of them are just trying to achieve that same goal of like, being really popular, being rich and successful, and being perceived as high class or whatever else, like, who's actually going to take on the responsibility of improving towns, improving cities or counties or whatever else? And especially when you have figures coming in who are really popular and really influential, and people want to be like them, right? They want to emulate them, and instead of actually continuing to focus on what the job is, they start to focus on trying to impress that person. Beck says, you can't escape structure of power. Politics is everywhere. You may not have an interest in politics, but the politics has an interest in you. Yeah, you're right. But I think there is an escape to the structure of power. And that's through the collective effort of the people in a sense. When the people stop serving these corrupt politicians, and when the people are educated on what are real true values and what are ways to improve the economy, what are ways to hold the people responsible for what they should be doing, and electing people who are doing work to improve things, or taking action when they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, it really starts to take shape. As we saw through a lot of the stuff that happened politically, when people start to actually shake things up and stop serving these people, stop providing them with the power that they need you for, then things start to shift. And a good example of that, and somebody actually, I was having a discussion with somebody, and they said, the big fish is always going to eat the little fish, right? We were talking politics, we were talking about all these like political structures and like all these corrupt systems and so on and so forth. And my answer to that is something that I've actually seen plenty of as well, is that, yeah, that might be the case, that the big fish might eat the little fish. But if there's like billions of little fish, they're going to send that big fish running. If they all band together, if they all collectively stand up against it, to improve their life and improve their safety and their conditions and so on and so forth, that's really a big game changer. But the way that the current social structure is, where people are kind of following this like fascist value of like superior, inferior, it's a perfect structure for dividing people. Because if people are busy trying to outdo each other based on this concept, oh, I work so much harder than you, I do so much more work than you, I'm so much better than you in this sort of way, less likely people are going to band together. So that concept of, a bunch of billion little fish confronting a big fish becomes less and less likely in that system. When people are so busy judging each other, criticizing each other, getting suspicious, and playing these superiority games with each other, they spend less time actually focusing on coming up with ways to improve their conditions. So if you have a crappy neighborhood and nobody's really taking care of things, it's like it's dirty, it's like people are miserable, there's like no jobs around, there's like high level of drug abuse and alcohol abuse and violence and all that stuff. Well, it's going to continue if people are just going to keep focusing on that structure, that whole like, oh, I'm superior to you because I have like this car and I have all this money, or I have this and that, or I have these many people who follow me and blah blah blah. Like, yeah, of course it's not going to go anywhere, because they're basically at each other's throats. They're just making things worse for each other, while all the corporations are profiting from it. All the businesses are profiting from it. So Beck says, to answer your question about who is actually trying to do good things, you have to play the game on a low level, like at my school. Like I mentioned, I'm now in charge of history, but to do that, I have to play the game of my school. Look good at things I don't care about, but the school definitely does. Even suck up to some people. It's sad, but you're never gonna do any good if you ignore the politics of the place. Rule zero politics. Without power, you can't change nothing. Yeah, there's definitely truth to that. You can't kick open the door and start commanding things your way and saying like, do this, do that, and so on and so forth. No one's gonna really care to listen about that. But there's a limit to it, and I think it's also really important to keep the goal in mind. And a lot of times people end up getting they get sucked into that system or that game in a sense, and they lose sight of what's really important, what are the good values. And it's a very very big chance of that, especially when you got some power structure that is focused on superior, inferior, that whole thing, because some people get caught up in that, and that happens everywhere. I've been to all sorts of places, and it's a very common form of social interaction, and some people initiate that. They believe in that power structure, they have those kind of values, they're basically Nazi values, and some people don't even realize that. This is how deep that system is that's in place through education systems as well. Like when you're thinking about like sororities, right, and fraternities or whatever else, like their entire structure is based on that superior, inferior, right, alpha, beta, that whole thing, alpha male, those are all Nazi values. Those are concepts that have to do with Nazi behavior in a sense, and people end up falling into these categories or falling to these structures because they want to progress or whatever else. So in some ways it just feeds itself into the system in a way that perpetuates all this stuff. That's what I mean. It's like important to always keep in mind what the real true values are, and having a certain limit to how much you're going to get involved in, just like navigating through it while still maintaining the true values of it. But if you get sucked into that game, if you start thinking about things and fighting people on that territory, you kind of become that, So if you start playing into this like superior, inferior, and you're trying to assert yourself, and you try to like do all those things, and take it into this like into that territory, it's like you've already been converted in a sense. Now you're operating in that mode. You're seeing things through that light. And if you don't step out of it, you're going to be consumed by it. You're going to become that. And I think that's problematic. Especially what I was saying, like it's very common. It's something that is in colleges, and it's perpetuated in work environments as well. You got those like ladder climbers or whatever, where they assert themselves and their dominance over others and whatever else. And where do they learn that? College, right? Like those fraternities and whatever else. It's like they're grooming them to basically continue and perpetuate those environments, those values, those behaviors from college onto like work environments and so on and so forth. And it also, especially because of the internet, it spreads to even younger people. And I've noticed that even more younger and younger people are accepting this like Nazi value system because it's being passed down. You see through the internet, whether it's shows that people could look up, or people uploading certain things and talking about them. And young people being so involved with the internet, with social media, they get exposed to that a lot faster than ever before in history, right? If you think about it, like maybe our generation, we didn't have that. We didn't really get that unless it was told from, let's say, an older sibling. Like, this is how things are. And you know that is a big thing. That, there's some people who become so jaded by all that, they start passing down to the younger generation, like, this is how things are, and so on and so forth. So kids younger and younger start behaving in this way. So you could see how incredibly toxic, literally, like, it just spreads like wildfire if people don't stand up to it, if people don't say, like, hey, I don't like these value systems, I don't want to work for companies that have that, I don't want to climb the ladder if this is the kind of ladder it is, because then more and more people will accept it. If you don't say anything, if you don't talk about it, if you as they say, keep your nose down and go through the grind, then you're enabling it. You're teaching somebody else, like, yeah, that's what you have to do. and the less and less people will actually do anything about it, especially when they start getting results based on that system. So it's a well-oiled machine. There's this podcast that I listen to very frequently. It's called Peter Joseph. It's called Revolution Now, and he talks about a lot of this stuff. He talks about how there's so many things that are in place, brought on by, of course, people with these like fascist Nazi values or whatever, that kind of end up like, once you get it running, it all starts to feed itself in a way. Like you just have to just push it, and it starts to work itself that way, in that direction, and it starts to become incredibly toxic like that, and it keeps spreading more and more and more. But yeah, I think, like I was saying, like the solution to it is for people to stop valuing those things, to confront those things, and band together, come up with solutions, create businesses that don't have those kind of values, that don't encourage those kind of values, that don't say things like, well, you got to step on some necks in order to get a promotion, or you got to step on people in order to show that you have the right stuff. Whatever that crazy idea is. If you are going to check out Peter Joseph's stuff, I would highly recommend watching his movies. It's called the Zeitgeist Movement, or Zeitgeist. I don't know if you've heard of it, but excellent documentaries talking about all sorts of things, like a lot of the stuff that we discussed here today, and just giving you a better understanding of really what the true value of reality is. And it's definitely not serving these like Nazi agendas and corporations and capitalism and this like constant chase for money and fame and all that stuff. Like, it's just, that is a trap. It's a huge trap, a very toxic one, and really deteriorates social interaction. And I'm gonna say it really deteriorates the concept of love. People are less and less involved with that, and more involved with fame, popularity, money, just very superficial, very capitalist system based values. But that movie, and there are several of them, have excellent points, excellent examples of it being toxic, and offers solutions. So it doesn't just talk about like, oh, this is terrible. Like, yeah, we all know that kind of, but there are a lot of things that they talk about that also provide solutions as well. And with that said, y'all, this is like way over the time. It was a great stream. Thanks to Bex. You really put out some great questions out there. It was a lot of fun talking to you. Hope I see you soon. But unfortunately, I'll have to clip this stream for the night. I will be back tomorrow, same time and place, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for more drawing basics, and also more of the project stream that you guys saw yesterday. So make sure you tune into that. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, check out the Patreon page for ways you guys can get involved with the Art Lounge Alley and show some of your work, and several other ways as well. So check that out as well. Check out the social media, and I'll see you guys soon.